well, also because of his father, his family name, but he had run for the state senate, seemed a respectable guy, and he had also helped us break the story of the stealth fighter. John had taken a colleague of mine, Ned Day, out to the area around Area 51, told him about the stealth fighter F-117 being developed there. Ned broke the story before any national networks or anyone else, and it was a big coup. So John comes into the station one day with a pile of UFO documents trying to get Ned interested, and Ned was having no part of it. He thought, that'd be crazy. People would laugh at me if I did this story. I was eavesdropping at the moment, and I said, hey, let me take a look at that stuff. And it included some legitimate national security, military-type documents that had been squeezed out of the government through FOIA, and some stuff like MJ-12 that at best is in the, kind of the gray basket. I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So I had John Lear come on this show that I produced at the time, a little talk show called On the Record, one of these things that runs at 6 o'clock in the morning on Sundays that nobody ever watches, and you have the city councilman on, things like that. Lear comes on, and he was just outrageous. At that time, he was sort of spreading the Lear gospel. He was developing his white paper that became pretty famous and infamous over the years. And he spilled all this stuff out, and I thought, wow. And all of a sudden, the phone started ringing, and I'm getting all these inquiries. And I had him on again, and he got even more outrageous, and the response was even bigger. And I realized, wow, this topic that I had never really paid any attention to touches the pulse of the public in a way that I did not understand. And so I figured, I'm going to start looking into it. And I relied on Lear to sort of navigate the waters to find out what legitimate information there was. And I figured, I might start looking into this. And I had Lear on a third time, and to my eternal shame, he brought a guy named Bill Cooper on with him. You guys know him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes.
Bill Cooper, the infamous Bill Cooper. He came on and played this tape about the JFK assassination being carried out by the driver of the car, and he told this vast, incredible UFO conspiracy tale, and how the secret government is controlling everything that goes on regarding UFOs, and he was afraid for his life, and this was the last time he's going to talk about it, and he's going to disappear, which, of course, turned out not to be true.
Let me ask you a quick question before
Sure.
you go on. Did you take any of this seriously, or was it just, to your way of thinking, some sort of kooky entertainment?
Yeah, it was closer to that. I mean, a kooky entertainment, because it became clear to me that some of this could not be proven at all. When I had that third show, and the public response was kind of big, and Lear sort of, he intimated that he knew somebody that was actually working at Area 51 and had talked about flying saucers. I thought, look, I got to look into this. So I asked him to introduce me to this guy. I figured that would be my angle as a way to get into a local angle on the news story about Area 51, and if I could find this guy, if he talked to me. The guy turns out to be Bob Lazar, and it was in May of 1989 that I finally got Lear to hook me up with Lazar, and we had him on this interview with his face all blacked out, and he made these allegations that are now pretty famous, and I thought, wow, if even a fraction of this is true, that's a heck of a story. And so I started diving into it. I spent about 8 months working on the Lazar story, other stuff as well. My news director and I worked on it. We recognized that this is pretty perilous for us to pursue this. I mean, because the UFO field is filled with pretty wacky stuff, conspiracy nuts and hopelessly gullible saucer nuts, and we recognized we had to approach this like any other story and weed some of this stuff out, which we did. We tried. Ultimately, that's how it got me into the UFO topic, and I've never been able to really shake it since. I mean, I've done thousands and thousands of stories on other topics, but I'm pretty sure that when I die, that if I have a tombstone, that's what's going to be carved on it, the UFO guy.
All right, let's look at John Lear. When did he seem to unravel in your eyes? Because obviously he started as a pretty credible person based on what you're telling me.
Yeah, well, I like him. I don't like to, I still like him. I live near him now. I've got a new house up in his neck of the woods, and I talk to him from time to time to see what he's up to. But obviously, you got to take what he says with a grain of salt. You can't take everything literally because it changes. The story changes. When he started talking about aliens being here to essentially eat us or to create this alien hybrids in these giant vats, talking about the underground base at Dulce, I thought, well, I'm really going to have to be careful what I use from Lear. But he does have really good contacts. I mean, he did fly for the CIA. He knows all kinds of people through his father, through his family name, through his military and intelligence experience. And so, you can't completely discount him. But as I mentioned, you do have to take everything he says with a big grain of salt.
So where do you separate the wheat from the chaff when you're listening to him? Do you just sort of sit back and say, wow, this is fun? Or do you try or make a solid effort to say, you know what, maybe there are a couple of things out of this that really have some basis in fact. I got to find out what they are.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I mean, looking for the diamonds in the rough, so to speak. You know, John's scenario is pretty dark and grim and big, and I don't buy it. I mean, I don't buy the all-powerful controlling group, UFO secret society or secret agency, whatever it is. I'm not sure that there is such an agency. I know there's a lot of discussion in the UFO fields about the possibility, but I haven't seen the proof. So the overall giant conspiracy, the treaties between us and aliens, I don't buy any of that stuff.
So I guess that makes it pretty clear how you feel about the whole disclosure movement then as well.
Yeah, I don't think there's any disclosure coming. I'd like to see it. I think probably there is a storehouse of information somewhere. I suspect maybe it's been taken out of government hands as a further to create a further buffer between people like you and I and the public and those who keep the secrets. There's obviously a lot of data somewhere. You know, we've had so many countless reports of pilots and gun camera images and things of that sort that are picked up and taken away somewhere. We know that Bollinger memo was very real. It said any cases involving national security, that information goes somewhere else where we don't know. So I think there probably is a big pile of information. I'm not sure it's something that's ever shared with the president. I don't expect President Obama, even if there is a pile of information that he has access to come out anytime soon.
Right.
He's got a heck of a lot of stuff on his plate, and I don't think he needs UFOs mucking it up.
Certainly not. The daily revelations about the economic problems. Right before the show, I was telling Gene about this AIG memo that's been leaked. I don't know if you know about this, George.
No, I don't.
It's
you may not want to know after.
Yeah, you may not want. It is truly it's terrifying in a way that very few things in the paranormal realm certainly are, and it sort of underscores the huge problems we're facing, not just nationally but certainly internationally on a global scale. The financial system is in a terrible state. So
I mean, can you imagine Obama coming out to talk about UFOs in the middle of that?
No, not hoping to have any credibility, certainly. And I think we're on the same page with the issue of disclosure. We had a recent episode with Steve Bassett, and it was a bit ugly because, let's be clear, I think, like you just pointed out, there's clearly some amount of information being contained somewhere, but the idea that there is a concerted effort within the government to release this, even the definition of what the government is at that point, small covert groups having some amount of information, which clearly, like you said, there is some amount of data. What about the allegations that at Area 51 there are projects going on where some of that data is being deployed in some sort of a practical fashion? Have you really seen or gotten any information that would indicate that?
Well, wisps of it. Bits and pieces. In addition to Lazar, and I know there are lots of questions about Lazar, and most of them I raised myself in the beginning. In addition to Lazar, I've got more than 24 people who've worked at the base over at different periods. People who don't necessarily know each other, who worked there at different times, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, who've all given me little bits and pieces of the story, glimpses of saucer-like craft. There are some photos of saucer-like craft, a famous shot that Gary Schultz took of what looks like a flying sombrero out there. I think they probably did have something that looked very much like a flying saucer. Whether it was alien in origin or not, I don't know. There are always little hints about this kind of stuff, and the oppressive secrecy doesn't help it any. I mean, it makes it look really suspicious. I know there are a lot of folks who believe that it was a story created by the government to deflect attention away from what really goes on out there, legitimate national security programs and projects. And if that is the case, in Lazar, for example, a lot of people believe he was a dupe. He was used to put this story out to deflect attention away from something else out there. And if that is the case, it is a miserable failure. Somebody should have their ass spanked for that because as a result of the UFO stories coming out, and I've certainly played my part in that, tens of thousands of people have made the trek out there to see whatever it is that's flying around in the sky, to spy on that base, to peek down on it through telescopes and binoculars from different vantage points. Every major news organization in the world has beaten a path to that door. CBS and ABC and NBC, 60 Minutes, Nightline, Larry King, Geraldo, the BBC, you name it. They've been out there looking around and asking questions, and that's not the kind of thing that any secret base or classified military installation wants. So if, in fact, it was a created story, that the rumor was started by them, I think that was a big, big mistake on their part. I think that it's possible that something like that was out there. I've had enough people whose credibility I consider to be fairly high who've told me this story in varying degrees. There's one guy in particular, he's not a Lazar. Whatever you think of Lazar, this guy's credentials are not questioned. I mean, I essentially stalked him. I knew where he worked in past years. I knew that he would have been in a position to know, and I just started sort of showing up at events where he would be, and introduced myself, and we talked about the good old days of atomic testing, and eventually he invited me over to his home to share with me some of his scrapbooks and memorabilia and things of that sort. When I got there, he sort of closes the book and he says, "You're not here to talk about this, are you?" I said, "No, not really." He says, "I know what you're here to talk about."
Hey neighbors, as we said, this episode of the Paracast is being brought to you by Audible.com, and you can download a free audiobook of your choice. And you can select from over 40,000 audiobooks and lots more, featuring bestsellers about the paranormal, about UFOs, novels. You pick it, and when you get the book that you want, just download to your Apple iPod or over 400 other devices. All right? You can download your free audiobook today at audiblepodcast.com/Paracast. That's audiblepodcast.com/Paracast. This offer only good for USA listeners.
We want to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our forums where you can talk to fellow listeners and Gene and David. Just go to theparacast.com and click on the forum links. That's the forum links at theparacast.com.
Hi, this is Don Ecker, and you are tuned in to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. Hey, let me tell you what, you're going to hear stuff here that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Hear that, George Snorri?
We're talking to George Knapp, and he's an award-winning journalist, UFO investigator. He has investigated the mysteries of Area 51, the Skinwalker Ranch, and we'll get to some of the latest developments on that if there are any later on. But right now, please tell us, what did you learn from this information that this guy gave you?
Well, he started opening up that he had been at Area 51 in the earliest days of when the base was opened, talked about a variety of different secret projects, and then started talking about UFOs. And it was like pulling teeth to get him to talk about it. Over the course of the next 6 or so months, we'd have lunch and breakfast, and he wouldn't allow me to take notes, no recording devices, and so I would ask him these questions, and then I'd write furiously on a notepad after I left to recreate the conversations. And over the course of those months, he told me that there had craft out there, that they had been taking them apart to figure out how they worked, that they were completely stumped. And I would ask him things like, well, look, are you worried that you'd have an accident, that the story would get out? He said at one point to me, we're more worried about it getting out, meaning a live creature? That's what I'm asking him. He said, yeah. And we go into a conversation over a course of a couple of meetings about an alien. And I know it sounds outrageous, and it's hard to believe, but again, the guy was in a very high position. His family was in politics here in Nevada, and so a well-known family here, and a very credible guy. And he's telling me this story. He says, yeah, we had an alien. I said, no, and you were keeping it captive? It came all this way, you kept it captive? He goes, yeah, well, in the beginning, we couldn't communicate with it. We didn't know how to communicate, and then eventually we worked out a system where we could communicate. And, of course, this story that this guy is telling me sort of dovetails into a lot of what Lear had said and others had believed, as incredible as it may sound. And he told me a story. He said, you know what this alien looked like? He kind of looked like a political figure. And at the time, Ross Perot was running for president. He told me this thing looked like Ross Perot, little skinny guy with great big ears.
Well, that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, Ross Perot is an alien.
I might believe that, actually.
So the guy told me this story. I said, look, I got to be able to do something with this. This story needs to be told. He said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll put something on videotape that can be released after I die. Now, that was 15, 16 years ago. The guy's pretty old. He's in the upper 80s, but he's still alive. I talked to him once, maybe 8, 9 years ago was the last time I talked to him, and he indicated to me that he had, in fact, made that tape, and that it's in possession of one of his kids, and that I would get it afterward, and it would be one heck of a story based on just his personal credibility to have somebody of his stature say that the story is true. Anyway, there were a lot of other people who came forward with bits and pieces of information. There was an engineer, for example, who worked at KLAS here and had moved on to a TV station in the Pacific Northwest who had worked at Area 51 before he worked for us, and he had told us a story when he worked here about seeing a saucer under a tarp out there. And this is kind of a weird series of events that happened to me while I was investigating this thing. It sure seemed like somebody was listening to the phones. And I know you get that paranoid element in the UFO field. You always figuring somebody's listening in, Big Brother, the government, or whatever. But this happened to me 6 different times where somebody agrees on the phone to give me information, and then they're visited. This guy, this engineer, who worked with us, who I had known prior to working on Area 51 stuff, agreed to give me an interview. I was going to black out his face, and he was going to tell me a little story about seeing this saucer under a tarp in a hangar out there. And the next morning, he wakes up, and there's these 2 guys in a car, and one of them speaking on a radio, and they're wearing sunglasses and making it very obvious to him that they look like government types. They follow him to work. When he got off work, they followed him home, again speaking in the interview, and he got intimidated by it and wouldn't talk to me. There was a lady who works here, and she still works in the Clark County court system here in Las Vegas, and she came to my attention through a guy who was a bailiff who now works as an investigator for the district attorney. He had struck up a conversation with her about UFOs and found out that she had been a stenographer for Holmes & Narver, which is a major defense contractor. Said she had sat in on meetings between the Air Force and contractors in which they talked about recovered discs and recovered alien stuff being taken from crash sites and Wright-Patterson and stored at Area 51. And this bailiff guy I knew asked her if she'd be willing to tell me the story, and she said yeah. So I talked to the bailiff about this on the air. The very next day after we arranged to meet this lady, she gets visited by 2 guys who flashed badges who said, you know, you're still under a security clearance. You still have a security oath that's in effect. We know that you and your daughter travel back and forth between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. There's a lot of desert out there, lady, and we'd hate to see something happen to either one of you. And she was petrified. Now, this is 20 years ago, and she's still petrified and still won't talk to me about it. There was a guy named Roy Byram who did taxes, prepared taxes for a lot of military people. Got to know him pretty well, high-ranking officers at Nellis Air Force Base, and he started hearing these flying saucer stories from his clients and would ask him about it, and would get bits and pieces about it, and offered to give me an on-camera interview when I was working on a second series in 1990. And again, the next day, he's visited by 2 guys who said they were from the Secret Service, and they heard he was been making threatening statements about the president and how would he like to go to prison, which he wrote to me and allowed me to use this statement. Basically, his interpretation was, shut your mouth. Anyway, there was a series of 6 of those right in a row. It really struck me that somebody really was listening in, and in years later, I've had 2 of these guys who are following us around, but us meaning me and Lazar and Gene Huff, maybe looking to see who we were getting information from or who we were meeting with. But that stuff, you know, there are a lot of critics of the Area 51 story, and I understand that. But I lived through some of this stuff, and there was some weird stuff that went on during those years, during that whole Lazar episode. People following us around and break-ins at the houses, and it was spooky. It was a spooky time.
So it came to an end at some point in time, that this harassment
Yeah, it sort of fizzled. Kind of fizzled. You know, we did a second series with Lazar, and of course it became a pretty big story all over the world, and people were flocking to his door trying to get him to do interviews. And he came to me. We met for a beer one day, and he says, "Hey, I got to tell you something. I'm involved in a little illegal whorehouse." I go, "What?" He says, "Yeah, I got a girl. I've been seeing this hooker, and she had a little operation she's running in an apartment building, and it happens to be on the same street where I lived at the time. I thought, oh, geez, there's my whole professional life is kind of flashing before my eyes. I mean, here's the highest profile witness and the highest profile story I'd probably had ever done. And he's telling me that he's involved in an illegal brothel. And he said, yeah, I expanded it. I helped her expand. We recruited some girls. We rented the apartment next door, poked a hole in the wall, and now she's got an office and a working area. I thought, oh, Jesus. So I said, I don't believe it. So Lazar takes me over there and shows me this. And I told him, look, man, you've got to stop this. You got to come clean. You've got to shut this down. Because everybody was looking at him. He had all kinds of scrutiny. This is going to blow up in his face. His credibility also had been questioned on several levels already, quite legitimately. So I called the cops, and I told them, with Bob's permission, I said, look, this thing's been going on. A couple of your undercover guys know about it. I think one of those cops had been having an affair with the hooker who ran the operation, and I'm just calling to let you know that we're shutting this thing down. It's going to go away. Well, they reacted by immediately sending out a team of ICE cops to bust the operation, arrested Lazar. It was a big stink, a major black mark on his reputation, and probably on mine to some extent, an embarrassment. The interesting that they wanted to give him hard time, which is a rarity for an accused pimp in Las Vegas, certainly back then. They wanted to give him hard time, and the reason is that parole and probation, who'd prepared the sentencing report, could not verify his background. They went through some of the same sort of challenges that I had gone through. And, in fact, Bob had told them the same story he told me. And if you're thinking, he's a con man or he made this stuff up, that would have been the time to come clean about where he went to school, about who he worked for, Area 51, all that stuff. Come clean, because he was looking at hard time, a couple of years. But he didn't. He stuck to the story, and he got probation eventually. And as a result of that, sort of the interest kind of waned a little bit. Every once in a while, I will do an update on where is he now kind of a thing. And this being the 20th anniversary, we might put something together later this year, sort of a retrospective. But in general, until I did this UFO hunters thing a couple of months ago, I haven't talked about Area 51 for quite a while.
Does that mean there's been less activity out there? I mean, one of the things that, and actually before we even get to that, George, getting back to the fellow who you had the meeting with, who said that he had actually seen an alien being. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. Yep.
Okay. He indicated that they had a hard time communicating with it early on. Presumably they were at some point able to open some line of communication with this thing. Did he give you any other details about that?
That's the impression that I got, but I never got any information from him about where these things were from or why they were here or any of the really big questions. I had hoped to continue that conversation, and he abruptly cut it off. He said that my continuing presence there was causing him some problems, that somebody had seen us together and he had to keep his mouth shut. But that was the last meeting that I had. Like I said, he had indicated that the tape had been made and I could have it after he passes on. Right. But, at this point, I guess I'd believe it when I see it.
Yeah. I was watching a little segment of a MUFON presentation I think you did last year up on YouTube. God bless YouTube. There was something that you said that I think really rings of interest to our listeners, and certainly to Gene and myself as we try to have more thoughtful discussions about all this. In that you had indicated that at one point you had a conversation with Jacques Vallée, who we've had on the show, and that he had made a statement to the extent that he would be disappointed if the big sort of revelation about all of this is that these were simply visitors from another planetary system of some sort. Right. And something that you brought up, which I think we need to open up more of a discussion about, certainly in any kind of mainstream way about this, is that this assumption that the sourcing of some majority of these craft is as simple as it being an extraterrestrial set of visitations is perhaps a flawed one. And I'm wondering if we can talk about that a little bit. And I know that kind of dovetails on some of the research you had done out at Skinwalker Ranch, where you found tenuous connections between these things and overlap.
Yeah, well, Vallée had first proposed this several years ago, and it fell with a thud in the UFO community because, you've got folks who are nuts and bolts saucer guys who got to believe that this is a mechanical craft created by people from another planet, that they're visiting from other planets, and that's something you can wrap their head around. Something more exotic like other dimensions, parallel universes, that's a little tougher to swallow. But Vallée looked at all the data from across the world, and realize these are not just visitors popping up here for expeditions every once in a while. There are simply too many sightings to explain that. He says, look, you look at the craft, you look at the reports of the craft, the credible, legitimate cases that have been investigated by the military, and if those cases are being reported accurately, then these craft are able to bend space and time in a way that we don't understand. And if they could do that, if they in fact can manipulate space and time, essentially they could be from anywhere. They could be from everywhere. They could be extraterrestrials and interdimensionals and time travelers all at once. So he thought that the ultimate truth would be far more exotic than something as simple as aliens visiting from another planet. And that's sort of the view that I've drifted toward over the last several years, especially in relation to Skinwalker Ranch, because what the stuff that happened out there doesn't sound like any standard alien story that we've ever heard.
Mm-hmm. In talking about all of this, do you get a sense that the government secrecy, and let's just define that as some group of people within the power structure of what we call the government having access to some amount of data, and we don't even know if there are conclusions behind that data, but let's presume that there is some body of evidence, as it were. Do you get a sense that perhaps one of the reasons that there is this tremendous level of secrecy is a potential reality that these guys don't really understand what it is they're holding, and they can't reveal that for what would be, I guess, very explicitly defined as national security reasons, the opposite of security being insecurity?
Business travel is a profitability killer. You know that. So do more and travel less with GoToMeeting, the easiest, most affordable online meeting service. With just a click, launch sales presentations, training sessions, product demos, or collaborative sessions right from your desk. GoToMeeting is so easy to set up and use, you'll have your first meeting running in seconds. Plus, hold as many meetings as you want for one flat rate. Free VoIP and phone conferencing included. Try GoToMeeting free for 45 days. For this special offer, you must visit www.gotomeeting.com/podcasts. That's www.gotomeeting.com/podcasts for a free trial.
Hi, this is Bud Hopkins, and you're listening to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg, David Biedney, and I completely, enthusiastically endorse this program. It's an absolutely great program with opportunities to stretch out and talk.
We're talking to George Knapp, who is a UFO investigator, award-winning broadcast journalist on TV. And now, what do they know, and when did they know it?
Boy, don't you wish you knew. So I'm sort of leaning in the direction where you're heading with the question, is that they have a lot of information, but my suspicion is they don't know what the hell to do with it. They might even have pieces of craft, as the stories go in Area 51. But as the stories are told by Lazar and others, they've been taking these things apart for a long period of time to try to figure out how they work, and haven't been making much progress. And I think that's entirely possible. I suspect that, there's a great big storehouse of info or data, cases, incidents, film, video, things of that sort, and they really don't know how to deal with it. And I base that conclusion on a couple of things. One of the most telling is people who have been on the inside of the government, people whose opinions I really value that I've got to know over the years. Some of those people went to work for NID out here with Bob Bigelow, ex-intelligence guys, CIA, people who had seen glimpses of this program or glimpses of a interest while they were in their official positions working within the defense and intelligence communities, and their curiosity had been piqued, and they would chase it down as much as they could within their official capacities and weren't able to get any answers, and which is why they could sort of continue the inquiry outside once they were in the private sector. Guys like that who have been on the inside as close to the secrets as you would think you could get, don't know. And their suspicion, I don't know if you've ever talked to John Alexander, their suspicion, as his is that there is a big pile of information, but nobody really knows what to do with it, and that there is not, at least not now, any kind of concerted, singular, omnipresent overlord of the UFO info within government, that people there don't know what to do with it either. And you get that sense from these national security cases, such as the 1975 overflights of U.S. nuclear missile bases along the Canadian border, where the military just seems befuddled. They don't want to admit that we don't know what it is that's flying around. We have no control over it. It can neutralize our most sophisticated and most powerful weapon systems, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I don't think they want to admit that, obviously. I don't think that they have any answers about what to do with it. And it's scary in some regard and sympathetic almost. You know, there they are, supposed to be the all-powerful, all-protective big brother, and I don't think they have any clue.
You know, all those rumors we hear from people who believe in disclosure, quote unquote, they try to give us a hint of what they think the government knows. Is this wishful thinking? Is it disinformation? Where do they get these crazy thoughts?
Well, you know, I think those disclosure guys, their hearts are in the right place, some of them anyway, but others have weaved together this rich tapestry of information into their own conspiracy theory. You know, some of those witnesses that were rolled out, for example, by Stephen Greer, they're pretty legitimate people who all had their own little bits and pieces of the story. Here's what I know, here's what I saw. And it's the Greers of the world who tie it together into something much bigger and grander. Yes, the secrets of all of our energy problems can be solved if we roll out this ET technology. It's the Greers of the world that tell that story. They take what seems to be legitimate, verifiable, credible information and then create something of it for their own purposes. And I don't know where else to go with it.
Well, what about the other paranoid opinion, which is some of this stuff is being fed to them by the government to maybe dissuade us from studying it further or just to mislead us as to what they really know?
Well, I think that's a real scenario, and I think it has happened. I mean, it goes back to the 1953 Robertson report where they studied it and said, you know, UFOs don't appear to be a threat to national security, but the continued reporting of UFOs could be a threat. It could be manipulated in some way. So we need to strip UFOs of their aura of mystery, and they even used terms like debunking. And I think they launched some sort of grandiose plans for how to make fun of UFOs. And whether or not those plans were ever carried out, it sure looks like it, because the laughter curtain is very real, even at this point. I mean, it's opened up a little bit. The kind of work that you guys do have, you know, added an element of credibility to the discussion of these topics, and that's good. But, you know, for far too many people, there really is a downside to talking about it. There really is a ridicule factor that's still in effect, and in that vein, I think it could have been very easy for government types to manipulate public opinion. We know that there are some guys who did those things that have, over the years, planted disinformation. A lot of folks think that that's the explanation for the MJ-12 documents, that they were written by insiders with bits and pieces of real information, but ultimately maybe created to confuse our enemies about what we know on this topic. Yeah, I think that disinformation is very real. I also think that disinformation would not be necessary anymore, because there's so many crazy UFO people who tell ridiculous stories and bring shame to the topic and ridicule to the topic, that there's no need for the government to belittle the subject. Ufology is quite capable of doing that all on its own.
Well, you know, your friend John Lear has claimed that David Biedny is a government agent of some sort.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm now participating in the conspiracy right here?
Apparently.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We're doing it right here. We're sitting here in an underground bunker.
And not to turn this into the discussion of personality, sadly, when you talk about things that happen on Earth, humans invariably are part of that story and part of that narrative. But it's odd to see some of and hear some of the things that Lear has claimed, and to think that people, you know, will even take it seriously at any level. I think what you just said is very telling, George, that the curtain of laughter around this is one that is kind of surrounded us almost by the virtue of gravity. No one really has to evoke it. It's there. And part of that is, of course, how the media deals with this topic. So here you are doing serious reporting, and I actually want to get to the Needles episode that you reported on last year, because I think that I'm curious about what the follow-up there has been, but you've been actually able to carve a territory out in the media landscape where you're doing some serious reporting around this. I mean, do you get pressure from the TV station to add an element of entertainment to this?
No, quite the opposite. They recognize that this is perilous territory, that it's thin ice, that, you know, our credibility, my credibility and that of the station are on the line when I do this stuff. So I try to approach it just like I would any other story, and report things that we can verify or at least reasonably deserve to be reported. So the station does not ask me to fluff it up or make it more sensational. Quite the opposite. They're very happy when I do these stories to tone it down a little bit and be careful. That's an example with the needle stuff. Now, we called it, and we can get into that in a minute, we called it a UFO in the strictest definition of the word, unidentified, because we don't know what it was. Do not make claims like it's an alien saucer or anything like that. And we're always careful, even with the Lazar stuff. Look, here's the story that he lays out. Here's where the problems are with it. You know, there are gaps in his story. There are things that don't add up that I don't believe to be true. But ultimately with him, I believe that he was telling the truth as he knows it, but whether or not we can ever document it or prove it in a subjective, an objective way, probably not. So, yeah, I try to navigate this cautiously, recognizing that there's a lot of people who would like to see it ridiculed and would like to see us go down in flames. The hardcore debunkers, whether or not they work with some all-purpose evil empire, that the UFO overlords, I tend to doubt it. But there are a lot of people that like to see this ridiculed. There was a story in our paper by the Associated Press, it might have run all over the country, about the UFO Congress in Laughlin that ended a week or so ago. It tried to, I think there were efforts, it tried to be down the middle, but just couldn't help itself. The same kind of little pot shots that smarmy reporters have used against UFOs over the years pop up in story after story, and they did in this one. You guys know the lineup at the UFO Congress. It's sort of like a come one, come all, and you got to take it again with a grain of salt. You don't have to believe everything. They got some interesting speakers, and then some speakers that I would not consider to be real credible. It's sort of like it comes with the territory. But for a reporter to cover it, you see this conspiracy thing, mix in exopolitics, and then you got some people speaking in Klingon and wearing the funny UFO beanie. It is so easy to make fun of that and to do it even without being too obvious, and it happens again and again. And I don't know if these reporters who just occasionally cover UFOs and make fun of the topic, they think they're the first guys or gals to have done this, to come up with the jokes and the elbow and the ribs, wink and nod kind of a thing, and poke fun at it. They all seem to use the same lines, the same jokes, the same approach to belittle the topic, and it does my profession no good. I mean, because it's the easy way. It's the easy way to make fun of it and crank out some jokes. The hard way is going out there, spending night after night at Area 51 with binoculars, dodging the security guards and coyotes and dirt clods and things like that to try to get to the story. It's the hard part is tracking down witnesses and trying to verify their background and getting documentation. That's hard work. These folks don't do that. It's a lot easier to make fun of it. And I get sick of it. I've caught so much grief on the UFO stuff over the years, most of it from my journalism colleagues. It just drives them crazy that I take this stuff seriously, that I try to approach it like any other story. I mean, I've broken a lot of good stories here over the years. I've been here a long time. Were it not for the UFO thing, I probably would be perilously close to being respectable.
Do you think it keeps you from being on a network?
I think it probably has put a ceiling over where my career could go. That's okay. That's all right. I like living here. I like working where I work, and my station has given me the kind of support that I don't think many stations would, allowing me to follow the stories where they lead. They don't ask me to do UFO stuff. When I come up with something that I think is interesting and deserves to be on TV, I pitch it to them, and they give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, mostly thumbs up, but never have asked me to fluff it up or add an entertainment factor at all.
Well, part of the problem, you mentioned the Laughlin event, the UFO Congress, and I didn't see that news item. But, of course, I think you've also pointed out, George, that the field is its own worst enemy. You look at the lineup, and this is, I think, what a lot of people who have a genuine interest in this start to look at and say, something sort of smells here. And this goes back to the thing that Greer did back in 2001, putting a bunch of, in some cases, very credible witnesses up with people who were very problematic. And this is something that we see over and over again. You look at the lineup for the Congress, and again, we don't want to make this about the personalities, but it's easy to see how people in the media would go and sit in on a session from one of the more questionable people at this Congress. I'm not going to mention names. People can look at the lineup and, based on the things we've talked about in the Paracast, they get a very clear idea of who I've got in mind. There are names on here who are, not respectable people in any realm. and they get thrown on the same stage, given the same weight and credibility as people who, do have good things to say and who are credible. Is there any way that we're ever going to get around this? Or, again, is it that you see this at a place like the UFO Congress because they want to fill seats, and so they look to get a wide cross-section of all sorts of different speakers, people talking about serious UFO stuff, and then people talking about establishing love circles with the Space Brothers.
Is that that's not serious?
Well, no, but
I was sitting here, David, please, I was sitting here thinking I could establish a love circle with my wife. We'd, call in the, forget it. Fate magazine is proud to be celebrating its 60th anniversary and its 700th issue. That's 60 years of bringing you true reports of the strange and unknown. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, life after death, and much, much more. It's bigger and better than ever. Subscribe now by calling 1-800-728-2730 or online at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
You're in the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. You never know what's going to happen next.
Listen, we're going to have George Knapp joining us on the Paracast this week, and we are not kidding around. We understand why there are concerns about events like this where they have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it's a smorgasbord of UFO events, and it takes away the credibility, doesn't it?
Well, I think it does to some extent, because it makes it so easy for people like that AP reporter to go there, sit in on a little bit, spend a half of a day, and then write a smarmy, smirky little story like the one that was printed in the paper here. And it happens over and over again. You do have organizations like MUFON that are much more selective in who they have to speak at their symposiums. I've spoken at their international symposium a couple of times, and it's a pretty good lineup. Doesn't mean you have to buy everything that everybody says, but they do weed out the real crazies and have a sort of a scientific bent, and I think they do a pretty good job. Yeah, I think the UFO Congress does have the broadest possible appeal, so they can put butts in the seats and make a little money. I guess they would say, look, we're offering a forum for all kinds of different things. You can pick and choose what you want, but it does not help the overall credibility of the subject to have ufology mixed in with all this other crazy stuff. As you said, ufology is quite capable of screwing itself up, its own reputation, without any help from anybody else.
So, given that we know that, George, how do we then try to change the tone of the conversation? Is it something we should try to do? Is it even in the realm of possibility that that's something that could be accomplished in our lifetimes?
I don't think so, because it's the consumer, the public, what they want. Now the internet, the crazier the story, the more interest there is. I'm thinking of people like Dan Burrish and Dr. Dan Crane here in Las Vegas, and the ridiculous story that he tells, and it gets wilder and wilder every year. And he's got a cadre of people who are willing to buy those tapes, so he keeps cranking it out, and he always has to step it up a notch with some new lie and new creation or mythology in order to keep the interest among his potential customers. I don't know how we weed that out. It is a free society. People can say whatever they want. You're welcome to pay attention to whatever you want, and I don't know how to stop it. This topic has always attracted crazies and fringe elements, and I suspect it always will. I don't have an answer. I don't think it'll end in our lifetime, not at all. No.
In the old days, of course, we try to separate these events. We'd have a serious UFO event, and then we'd let the contactees or the crazies or whatever you wanted to call them go to Giant Rock and make the Integratron. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't know what this machine is, and I'm not going to explain it to you, but you get the sense of it.
I went out there a couple of years ago to the Integratron, which is now being used. It's being rented out for some kind of like sonic experiences where people make weird mystical sounds on bones or rocks or something. Anyway, it's a really interesting building, but I'm not sure it was built from any space alien plans.
Well, that's what the intention was. One of the contactees, Daniel Fry, back in the 50s, he started collecting money, donations to build this machine that was supposed to give you perpetual life, as I recall. Or if it wasn't perpetual life, make you feel better. And I think the claims tended to disintegrate, or at least were lessened over time.
It's now of interest, I think, as a minor historical footnote, but as I said, it's being operated as some sort of a New Age hippie kind of healing center. It's an interesting place if you ever get a chance to go out there, just from an ufological historical standpoint.
Meanwhile, in contemporary times, there are interesting UFO cases going on, so I briefly brought up the Needles episode. George, for our listeners that aren't familiar with this, could you give us some background on what happened?
Sure. May 14th of last year, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, something comes blazing out of the sky, heading from the northeast toward the southwest. One witness who saw it is a guy named Frank Costigan, who was the chief of police at LAX for a couple of years and also chief of operations there, so he's familiar with all kinds of aircraft. He gets up to let out his cat, and this thing flies overhead. He said it was a long, oblong kind of an object, like a fuel tanker car on fire, turquoise flames coming out of it. He thought it was at first thought it was an aircraft that was going to crash. It dropped out of sight behind a mountain right by his house, and he thought he would hear something about it later, and subsequently he did. Down on the Colorado River, there's a guy named, I'll call him Houseboat Bob. He's fishing. He's floating down the river at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he sees this thing fly over, and it crash lands on the banks of the Colorado. He thought it was a plane as well. He runs upstairs on his houseboat to try to get a satellite phone to call out and call somebody and report a plane crash. And within a couple of minutes, these helicopters arrive. 4 smaller military helicopters and then a great big sky crane. And the sky crane dipped down below the where he could see it, picks this object up, still kind of glowing, and hauls it away toward the north. The other little helicopters followed. Subsequently, the next morning, there's this KTOX radio in the town of Needles. The guy who owns the station, which is where Frank Costigan, the ex-cop from LAX, is employed, this guy's driving to work, and he sees this convoy of really strange vehicles, blacked out windows, government plates, lots of antennas, guys in military haircuts, crew cuts, and sunglasses driving these things. They really give him the hard look. Followed him back to the station. He sees a whole phalanx of these things driving through town, and he thought it was interesting. And when his friend Frank comes into the station, he mentions it to him, and then they subsequently got a call on their talk show from this guy, Houseboat Bob, who described what was going on. Over the next couple of days, these men in black type people start showing up, asking questions about the incident. Bob sort of gets a little scared and goes underground, at least for a time period. And I think Linda Howe got wind of this from Coast to Coast Radio, from Ian over at Coast to Coast, and she started poking around, got an interview with Bob, posted it on her website, and then the story sort of ended there. I picked up on it last year in July. We went down and found Houseboat Bob. We found Costigan. We found some other witnesses, put the story together. We sent out a lot of inquiries to different military bases and the FAA and things of that sort to try to figure out if we could document it. We do have some information. It does appear that the military helicopters were in the air in that area. We at least have eyewitness statements that these Janet planes, the planes that ferry workers to and from Area 51, had landed at Laughlin that next morning. And it looks like maybe, my guess, it is a UFO in the strictest sense, unidentified, but it seems like it was some sort of a military project. It got out of hand or off a range or something like that, because, bam, they were on it in a big hurry. The story about these strange men in black gets a little more complicated, but we can talk about that if you want to get into it.
Well, just a couple of details about the actual object itself. When this thing was coming down, was it doing sort of a typical sort of a meteorite kind of a motion? Did it change direction or speed at any point?
It did. It slowed down. Both Bob and Costigan had said it seemed to slow down and then speed up while it was in mid-flight. But it didn't do any maneuvering, not like a saucer or anything like that. It was a meteor-type trajectory, except for the fact that it slowed down.
Was there any kind of an explosion or sound event when this thing impacted?
I think he said it was like a thump, which that makes sense because that area of the Colorado River, it's like a beach. It's real sandy. It's overgrown with salt cedar and other kinds of invasive plants. But he described it to us as a thump, and that area where we went and looked to see if we could see an impact point a couple of times and could never find it. But the whole area there is a real sandy bottom, and it makes sense that it would make a thump.
Okay, so this would seem not necessarily to be from out there, but it could very well be a secret aircraft or just any kind of military aircraft, which is why they ran out to find out what was going on.
Yeah, that would be my guess. It's interesting on a variety of levels. One, if you believe that there really are UFOs and that maybe some have been recovered after crashing, this is the kind of operation that might be able to do something like that. And if we accept the eyewitness statements, and I have no reason not to believe them, it would seem like they're pretty good at it. I suspect that it was a military program of some sort, maybe an advanced big UAV of some sort, or some kind of a test platform. They've got a lot of exotic stuff in the works, and this presumably got off the range or something went awry, and they were tracking it. The fact that they were able to get there so quickly suggests that they were part of the operation from the beginning. But again, that's just my guess.
Yeah. This Bob character, when he saw this thing, he saw this helicopter carrying it in the air?
Yes, he saw it. He said it went down below where he could see, because on the river it's a little bit lower than the bank. It went down below. It was there for just a minute or so, and then he doesn't know how they attached it, but then the sky crane picked up, and it was carrying this object back toward the north. And we actually have found other witnesses in the town of Laughlin, which is north of Needles, who saw this thing coming back. They didn't see it the other way, but they saw this thing being carried, this little flotilla of helicopters passing by the outskirts of their town.
Was this thing, I might understand that this thing was actually self-illuminated, it was emanating light?
Yeah, I've heard a couple of different stories. Bob at first said he thought it was still glowing when they picked it up. In my interview, I know on the UFO Hunters, I think he said something a little different, but he had told me in my interview he thought the thing was illuminated because the spotlights from the other helicopters were lighting it up, not necessarily that it was generating its own light. But the other people, the witnesses in Laughlin, had told me they saw a faint sort of greenish glow from this thing as it passed through their town. So, it's slightly different accounts from the different witnesses.
So slightly greenish, not reddish or whitish?
No. The descriptions have all been pretty consistent in that, and it was a turquoise-type flames coming from behind it, according to Costigan and Bob, and then the greenish or blue-green sort of a glow by the other witnesses as it was being carried away.
So what kind of flammable material creates a greenish flame or turquoise flame?
Somebody sent me a list of metals that produce. There's a couple of metals. I don't have the list in front of me of the metals that do produce that, but there's an answer to that. I have to dig that up and get it for you, but there is an answer.
Yeah, it's curious because if you think about a typical remote control craft or UAV, it doesn't sound like it's got the shape or morphology of something. Presumably, he didn't see any kind of wing structures on this of any sort.
No, it didn't. Nope. Like I said, the guy said it looked sort of like a tanker. Long, no wings, no tail, or anything like that. What the heck that would be, I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, no sound when it was coming over either, right? It was silent as it was coming over?
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't think he said there was any sound. He didn't hear any sound.
Well, that's always one of the things that I listen very carefully for, because there's that thing about my own UFO sightings that I personally had. There is this element of zero sound, absolutely no sound, which is sort of very, very odd to actually experience something that's mechanical in the sky that's not making sound. It's not something that your brain tells you makes any sense, because it doesn't, especially with something moving fast. Not like even like a balloon, or like a Zeppelin, or a blimp will have motors associated with it that are pushing it along, and they'll make sound, considerable sound, especially with things at low altitude. So that's always something that you end up listening for. And this idea that it's slowed down is, of course, interesting, but it didn't change direction. Is that correct?
Right. It could be a perception thing. It seems to slow down, but both of them had said it. So the stuff with the Men in Black is where the story got interesting for me, because they, I kept getting these stories about them floating around and asking questions. There was a lady who was at the radio station while Houseboat Bob called in. She's a Democratic political organizer, and she comes on the station, I guess, every week to do a little spot, and she was there when Bob called, and then 2 nights later she has this political meeting, and one of these guys shows up, and he's pacing around and smoking and wants to talk to her. Hey, I want to join your club, and can I join in? And she says, sure. And then he starts asking questions about Houseboat Bob. He goes, so you were there, huh? Well, what did Bob say off the air? How do I get a hold of this guy? She says, I thought you were here to join this political movement, join the party or something. And I guess the guy stormed away or something, and those kind of things were going on. The people in town started seeing these vehicles. I started getting reports from long-distance truckers and delivery guys who travel between Las Vegas and Needles and that area down there, and they had seen him. So my photographer, Matt Adams, and I started going down and look for him. As we're working on the Needles story, we just take off and go see if we can get lucky. And one day we did. We're driving back from Needles, just past the Laughlin turnoff, and Matt, the photographer, goes, "Man, there goes one. Boom, there goes another one." We flip around and caught up to this convoy of trucks, and they're just pretty much as the witnesses had described them: government plates, blacked out windows, lots of antenna, no insignia to indicate who they were other than the plate. So we catch up, and I've got the video camera hanging out the window, and I'm videotaping everything I can. We get up to the window, and pretty quickly these guys figure out that we're onto them. So I see them lifting up the radios, talking to each other, and pretty soon they pull over. There's a way station near Laughlin. These two vehicles pull over, and as they did, one's just sitting there, two of them sitting on the side of the road. We pulled over and got out and started shooting more video back in their direction. As we did that, three more of them came by. Zoom, zoom, zoom. So we were kind of sort of in a little standoff there, like who's going to draw their gun first. After a couple of minutes of us shooting back in their direction, the one truck comes up toward us, parks right next to us, gunning its engine, then goes about 10 feet beyond us. And then the other one pulls up a little closer, so now they got us essentially surrounded. These two guys get out of the first truck, civilian clothes, military mannerisms and bearing. We see the guy tuck in a piece in his shirt and hide it. As he comes out to us, he says, "We have to ask you to move off the side of the road. We're federal agents." I said, "Federal agents? Who do you work for?" "Well, we're federal agents. I need to see your ID right now." I said, "Well, okay, I'll show you mine. I'd like you to show me yours." And he whips out a badge, too quick for me to see it. And I said, "I need to see that again." He whips it out again, and sure enough, he is a federal agent. He worked for something called the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Agency, which has the oversight capabilities over anything to do with nuclear weapons. Actually, these guys, we were later to learn, operate for an even more obscure agency called the Office of Secure Transportation, OST. These are the guys in charge of transporting nuclear weapons and nuclear materials between different military bases and national labs. So we had a little encounter there, kind of a tense encounter on the side of the road. They're very professional, took down all our information and said, "Look, we need you to get off the side of the road, stop messing with us, don't interfere with our shipment." I go, "Shipment? What shipment of what?" He said, "I can't answer any questions." I said, "Well, look, I work with the NNSA all the time. They have a big presence at the test site. Can't we arrange to speak to somebody?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, somebody's going to be talking to you. You can count on that."
I'll tell you what, that's a good cliffhanger. For part two, we will rejoin George Knapp on the other side of the Paracast. Are you ready to order the official Paracast t-shirt? You asked, we answered. We're now taking orders for the official Paracast t-shirt. It comes in white, 100% cotton. The front of it features the same logo that we have on our community forums. On the back it says, "Separating signal from noise." It's just $14.95 plus shipping in your choice of sizes. To order the official Paracast t-shirt, here's all you have to do. Visit our new online store at store.theparacast.com. One more time, that's store.theparacast.com. You can use a major credit card or PayPal to place your order for the official Paracast t-shirt.
Welcome back to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedney.
We return with George Knapp, award-winning journalist, and not just somebody who has been credited because of something related to UFOs, but just covering regular stuff too, okay? He's been doing this for many, many years. He's been covering UFOs. He has entered what might be the cesspool of the UFO field and has basically found things there that are credible and worth investigating further. So you encounter these people. What happens next?
Well, we tracked them down, as I was describing. We track them down on the side of the road. They pull over, we pull over, and we had a confrontation there, and they told us they had worked for this NNSA, but actually another agency within NNSA, and I had asked them, "Hey, well, can we talk about this?" Because I work with these guys in Nevada all the time, and they said, "Well, somebody will be getting in touch with you, we're sure." And I'm thinking to myself, geez, I'll bet every one of my tax returns is going to be audited for the next 10 years by the time I get in on Monday morning. Sure enough, when I get in Monday morning, there was a call from a friend of mine in the He works for the Department of Energy. He said, "What the hell were you doing out there?" The message goes, "You don't know how close you came. Call me when you get in." So I called this guy, and he explained to me who these fellows were, working for the OST, the Office of Secure Transportation. This is a very impressive organization. I had never heard of them before, but it makes sense that there would be somebody in charge of this kind of thing. They recruit ex-commando types, special forces guys, cops, cream of the crop guys. They go through very rigorous screening, very rigorous training. It's an exclusive and much desired position because they have to be the most trusted guys in the government. They're in charge of moving nuclear weapons around. So I said, I talked to this friend of mine, so are they going to talk to me? He said, let me see what I can do. So within a week, a couple of guys flew in from out of state, from headquarters of this agency, OST, in Albuquerque, and we had a little off-the-record briefing. They just basically told me, I said, look, we're not a secret agency. We're not one of these agencies that doesn't exist. We just don't like a high profile because of what we do. But we do need cooperation from law enforcement around the country. So we let them know what we're doing. We don't announce shipments for security reasons, but we'd like them to know who we are in case we need some help out there. And they described what the agency does. I'm thinking, gosh, this is a great story. Have you ever done a news story about it? And they said, no. So can't we work something out? I said, maybe. And so I guess they did some checking on me, and they found the UFO stuff, and were a little concerned about that. But then my friend at DOE said, hey, I'm not a UFO crazy. You can trust him. He keeps his word. So they gave us first ever glimpse into their training exercises that were going on in a corner of the Nevada test site. And we got to go up there and see what they do and interview some of the people. The head of the agency flew out from Washington to meet us, and we did some stories. And, man, these are impressive guys. But without me asking about whether they transport aliens or crash saucers, they said, look, we don't transport aliens. We only transport nuclear weapons. I guess out on the road, there's a certain mythology that's grown up around these guys among long-haul truckers who see them out there in these convoys with these strange vehicles. And so it's created sort of an aura of mystery around them and a lot of speculation and wild stories, which is why I think they allowed me to produce something. So I essentially believe them when they say, we don't know anything about needles. We don't know who was running around asking those questions, but it's not us. Because when we get nuclear material, we put it in our convoy and we go, and we don't stop until we get to where we need to be going. Because that's their mission, and so I believe them. So I don't know if somebody is operating under the umbrella of these guys, making themselves look like these guys, just to confuse the issue, because there were a lot of similarities. I just don't think it's them. They told me some fascinating stuff. It's not a Paracast kind of a subject, but man, it's interesting about how these vehicles they've got. They're like transformers. They said if terrorists, for example, were able to somehow, as unlikely as it seems, overpower or take out the whole team, that these vehicles are capable of defending themselves. And if somebody tried to get in these trucks and grab a nuclear weapon, they would be dead. And I asked him, so what is it? What's the mechanism? Well, we can't tell you that. I don't want to give it away. But,
no, of course not.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff, though. So if these guys are certainly men in black types, but they're not the guys that were there, I think, asking the questions about the needles object.
All right, let's look at the men in black. What do you think they are? Really government agents or what?
I don't know. That's really strange. I'm sure you guys have read the stuff from way back when it seemed like they were aliens as much as government agents. The reports you hear are the strange languages, the weird cars and the outfits and the get-up, and there was sort of an alien aspect to it. I suspect a lot of that was hyped up by writers at the time, but some of those eyewitness accounts are from fairly credible people. I suspect that there have been from time to time agents who go around and collect UFO information. The guys who, for example, collect the gun camera film. We've heard those stories from different military pilots over the years that it goes into a locked briefcase and then it disappears somewhere. But I don't know what to make of it. I suspect it's mostly overhyped and like so much else in the UFO field has been greatly exaggerated in time.
There's some really credible stories, though, along those lines. I mean, you've got the Gordon Cooper story about what he supposedly shot out at Edwards Air Force Base, a disc landing, and that these guys in civilian clothes took this footage and basically vanished with it. When I hear someone like Gordon Cooper talking, to me, his story, and it's one that he told, I think it was in Out of the Blue, James Fox's documentary, very, very compelling. At the same time, you wonder, why haven't we seen any of this footage ever sort of even get leaked or surface, George? I mean, is it really something where it's kept under such covers that there's no chance we'll ever see any of this ever? I mean, do you ever feel in the work that you've done and the people you've spoken to, obviously you've had some pretty good access to people, has there ever even been the possibility that you thought you were getting close to any of that footage? Have you ever looked for any of that?
Oh, sure I have. I mean, that's the holy grail, that kind of stuff. But I've never got close to it. I have no idea where it is. I don't think I've even interviewed anybody who's actually sat down and seen it. It's mostly people who've heard about it, right, and have tried to find it themselves or learn more about it. I think that there might be footage like that. There certainly is similar footage of, incidents, as we were talking about national security kind of cases and encounters with the military. In the early 1990s, I went to Russia twice. We had a window of opportunity. And the premise I had was that was at the Perestroika and Glasnost, and the Russians were opening up on all kinds of stuff. They let out their Oswald files and things of that sort. And I thought, wow, this is a unique time to maybe find out what the Russians know about UFOs. Our government clearly is not demonstrating any willingness to spill the beans. So I thought if we could crack that window in Russia, gain access to Russian sources, we might be able to learn more about what our government knows about UFOs from the Russians than we will ever learn from our own government. And we did. We brought back several thousand pages of documents they had to secret, long-term military studies of UFOs, had collected thousands and thousands of case reports and eyewitness accounts and video and films, and there had been encounters with Russian warplanes. 3 of their planes had been shot down by UFOs. I mean, it was all being taken very seriously by their military, and they said our military and intelligence did the same thing, had the same approach to it. Where that information goes, I don't know. Why the government would not release it, I have a couple of ideas. I mean, it's the same ones that have been kicked around before. They might have had very legitimate reasons for the secrecy in the beginning, starting right after World War II. These things are appearing in the skies. They can fly rings around our best warplanes. They didn't want to panic anybody by announcing that we did not, in fact, have complete control of the skies over our nation, and so they decided to start studying it and figuring out what it was. I think over the years that so many lies have been told about it, Area 51 is an example of that. Whether or not there were ever crash saucers out there, I can't say for sure. I suspect something like that was out there. But you look at why they wouldn't open up the hangar doors and let us kick the tires on the UFOs or something like that. I think it's to protect their own butt to a large extent. They've told so many lies to the public and to members of Congress and to the media over the years about this, purposely sending us down the wrong path, probably have stolen millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, maybe billions from legitimate national security programs funded by Congress, and they've funneled that money instead into other things. I think these guys would go to jail. In fact, there was a congressional investigator who contacted a small group of one by one. He had the highest levels of clearances for Congress, and he was given a mission, basically, 15 years ago to make contact and see what there was to this UFO stuff. So he contacted a number of us individually over a couple-year period, and he came out to see me about Area 51, and I sort of gave him a briefing, and he went out there, demanded that they take him down to S4 where Lazar had said the hangars were and everything. And he told me, although he did not find the saucers out there or anywhere else, that he felt the reason for the cover-up was these guys would go to jail. If it ever comes out, if and when it comes out, a lot of these people, high-ranking military, intel people, would go to jail for the kinds of things they've done to perpetuate a cover-up. So it might be as simple as cover your own ass kind of a thing as the reason for it goes on.
Well, you've got to wonder about that. Who really would end up getting castigated or punished for this in any serious material way? Now, let's shift gears slightly here, George, because obviously your name has been very closely associated with the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. Back when we first had you on, we talked to you a bunch about what had been going on out there. And I was wondering if you could address at this point where the state of that particular property is at this point. I mean, has anything been done with the data? I mean, certainly there's some interesting stuff that comes up in the book, but whatever happened to that case?
Well, Bob Bigelow, Las Vegas developer, real estate developer, hotel owner, still owns the property. He has a couple of caretakers out there. He and I visited the property about a year ago, instigated in part by the constant intrusions, trespassers, and people just acting like jerks. The level of activity that's described in the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, has gone down so much that it did not warrant having the scientific team there, and that sort of led to the demise of NIDS, which just essentially went away. There's nobody left to analyze the data. There's nobody left to really study what goes on at the ranch, and the people who live there, who are there 24 hours a day, say there's been nothing like what had happened during the peak of the activity while another family and NIDS were there. There has been activity in the larger area, the Uinta Basin, some mutilation cases, UFO cases, daylight sightings of disc-shaped craft, but nothing on the property itself. Bob now has beefed up the security presence on the ranch over the past year. He and I flew up there, as I said, about over a year ago, because we kept getting these reports from trespassers, and we figured I volunteered, hey, I'll go confront some of these guys. Let me at them. He brings the head of his security force, a very savvy guy, packing heat. We go up there. The security guy is on the one far end of the ranch. I'm on the front gate, and Bob's in the middle going back and forth, and we're just going to wait and see what happens. And they equipped me they had all this camo gear on, and I had a walkie-talkies and bear spray and a million candle power spotlight, and they sat me out the front gate, and I was going to pass on the word, you guys are not willing to not welcome here. The problem had become that it's become like a party spot there. People would come and bring 12 packs of beer, park at the gate, get wiped up out of their mind drinking, throw all these beer cans all over, food wrappers, and then wander onto the property in the middle of the night. They'll use flash cube photo equipment, peeking in windows in the middle of the night, and just acting like assholes, basically. And so Bob was a little frustrated with it. I had become frustrated with it, and so we went up there. They put me at that front gate, and sure enough, both nights that I was there, it would have been September, I had encounters with people. So the first truck comes up. There's 3 people in a pickup truck. They pull up right to the gate, turn off the engine. They're just starting to get out of their car, and I think I'm sort of sitting in a lawn chair on the side of the road behind some bushes. I thought, well, it looks like they saw me. I pop out and flip on this million candle power light, and these people screamed, ah! And they throw the truck into gear, start it up, and burn down the road, just scared out of their wits. And I'm thinking to myself, by the time this hits the internet, they're going to tell, hey, we had an encounter with a 9-foot-tall Bigfoot with a laser beam or something,
I'll tell you what, we'll return in a moment to Bigfoot George Knapp, who reveals his true identity.
Hi, this is Bill Burns from UFO Magazine and UFO Hunters. There are several ways that you can get UFO Magazine.
Yeah, we know, Bill. We know. Just shut up. Just give us one way. Don't tell us you're psychic and, give it 8,000 phone numbers and take 15 minutes of our time when we just want to hear the show. Just tell us how we can get UFO Magazine in one way.
Okay. Just go to www.ufomag.com, subscribe online. You happy?
Yeah, was that so hard?
Actually, harder than you know.
We want to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our forums where you can talk to fellow listeners and Gene and Data. Just go to theparacast.com and click on the forum links. That's the forum links at theparacast.com.
George Knapp, of course, is an award-winning journalist, UFO investigator. We're returning to Skinwalker Ranch, where George Knapp puts on his Bigfoot uniform, and then...
Well, we did have, I was describing this trip we took out with Bob Bigelow and his security guy, and we had a couple of encounters and ran people off, trying to spread the message. Look, you're not welcome here. It's lucky that nobody's got hurt. You come creeping up to my window with a flash camera in the middle of the night, you might get shot, Bigelow has called the cops, but by the time they get there, these interlopers are usually gone. So he now has a regular rotation of his security people who are out there just for the purpose of keeping people off the property. I do get occasional reports from people, amateur investigators who go out there, they climb up on the ridge, they stake it out, and they describe some very wild experiences. I think it's sort of like a wishful thinking kind of a thing. If you drive a long way to go to Skinwalker Ranch, then by God, you're going to see a skinwalker, whether you really do or not. It's a sad thing that there isn't the level of activity that there was, because I know the people who are in that program, Colin Kelleher, my co-author, and me and Bob, would all love to see it go on, that their level of activity would justify a resumption of the study, but that just isn't the case. There are some other hot spots around the country that have popped up. Ted Phillips, I don't know if you've had him on
Marley
the program.
Woods, absolutely.
Yeah.
Friend of the show. Yeah.
The similarities to Skinwalker Ranch, I've been talking to Ted. I mean, it's amazing. It gets closer and closer to what we were encountering out there every time I talk to Ted, and I think there's a real opportunity for somebody to do some pretty solid research. I mean, he's been doing it, but I think he's been doing it on a shoestring. That's the same kind of stuff happening there. There is some interesting stuff going on with Bigelow, but I don't know if you want to get into that or not.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we wanted to ask you about this news that's just come up in the last week or so about him putting some funding behind MUFON. What's going on with that? Are you in the loop on that?
I am somewhat. I don't know if you guys listen to Coast occasionally, and I get your emails. And last fall, I had Bob on the program to make this announcement about the creation of BASS, Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Systems, in which he was going to actively seek out information about exotic propulsion technologies to sort of pick up the pace, not just to study UFOs, but to put together a team that is dedicated to finding out how these things fly, to collect information and figure out how they work, and maybe try to duplicate the technology, which is, what we've heard our government has tried to do over the years. So Bigelow's doing it on his own. And one aspect of that, when he made the announcement on the show, I figured it was going to be big news, but it just sort of fell with a thud. Oh, that's kind of interesting, because I don't think people realized how significant a development that was. Now it's sort of sinking in, because he's offered to put money up, put money where his mouth is, using MUFON as sort of the clearinghouse or a screening organization to figure out what projects, what incidents, what tantalizing details might be worthy of an infusion of cash and research. It's a very exciting prospect. I mean, Bob has always been kind of a frustrating guy for journalists and outsiders to deal with, because he doesn't like a lot of attention. He doesn't need it or want it. So he just made that announcement, and then he then it sort of went underground. But he's been quietly putting together a staff. I think he's got well over a dozen people now working for him already, and is looking for a couple dozen more. And they're ready to go. They're entertaining a number of research proposals, and sounds like he's going to jump into it in a big way. It's very exciting. I don't know that it's going to bear fruit, whether they're ever going to find the Holy Grail technology or not, but at least somebody's giving it a try.
So basically the idea is to go out and study UFO cases with the, I guess, hope that they're going to be able to figure out what the propulsion systems are behind these craft?
Yeah, it's a multifaceted thing. Part of it is they would study these cases if it shows some promise of indicating how the technology works. The other part of it, and the ones that he emphasized in my interview some months ago, is that he's looking for anybody who has squirreled away a piece of Roswell, or the guy who knows where the stuff was at Wright-Patterson, or maybe the backyard inventor who's created some kind of an anti-gravity machine, or the disgruntled former NSA guy who knows where the secret files are, that kind of thing. He is openly seeking anybody who has solid info, whether it's UFO eyewitnesses or whether it's former government insiders. I'm really curious about how the government views this thing, since Bob is actively recruiting people to spill the beans.
Well, it gets so complicated when you talk about this. I mean, I can tell you that in doing some work with NARCAP on the O'Hare case, one of the things that really struck me personally, and for me provided a bit of a clue, when we talk about propulsion systems, and I know I've talked about this on the show before, but there was something about the O'Hare episode when this craft supposedly shot through the cloud cover, left the hole. What seemed to be the case was that this thing did not make any kind of sound, no sonic boom of any sort. And this actually sort of falls in line with an episode that I had growing up, which was a sighting of a UFO craft, very close proximity. And I watched this thing shoot straight up, and it made absolutely no sound, no sonic boom of any sort, which to me was an indication that this thing, and again, I didn't think of it at the time, I was a kid, but looking at the NARCAP episode, doing some analysis work on some of the supposed photographic evidence that surfaced from that, and there was an interesting story behind that in a presentation I did at a UFO event last year that I went public with, and it generated it got Bill Burns all hot and bothered when I was showing some of this photographic work that we had come up with. But anyway, there is something about the idea that these things are not fully material when they move at high speed. If you're in a craft, you're in an object that is not actually displacing air, that indicates that this whole, what we normally think of as the rules of physics, where you have resistance and you have something that will break the sound barrier and create a sonic boom. There have been some interesting things along those lines recently, in fact, out in California, and just as when we're taping this right now, a couple of nights ago here in New York, in Westchester County, there was this huge sonic boom that happened. A lot of reports about it. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows what the actual source is. But there is something about the idea that these things are not fully material, like we think of them as being solid, when they're moving quickly. And, it's interesting, George, because then that kind of connects back into the whole discussion of what we originally started the show with today, which was this idea that, are we talking about interplanetary visitors? Are we talking about interdimensional visitors? And this idea that occurs to me that, well, when you've got something that can basically move between star systems, the only way you could even do that would be essentially to bend space-time. There's no other way, any kind of conventional method of transportation we can think of, to just try to gain large speeds. There are all sorts of problems with that, but when you bend space-time, if you change the rules of the game, then all of a sudden, a lot of the limitations that you have are no longer apply. And so looking at it from that point of view, it's interesting to think that Bigelow is confident that we know enough about even the nature of physical reality to be able to have any kind of a handle on what those propulsion systems are. I think there's a problem there with just our limits of understanding of our own physical reality.
I'll tell you what, before we put limits on anything that we can do, Fate magazine is proud to be celebrating its 60th anniversary and its 700th issue. That's 60 years of bringing you true reports of the strange and unknown. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, life after death, and much, much more. It's bigger and better than ever. Subscribe now by calling 1-800-728-2730 or online at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
Hi, this is Don Ecker, and you are tuned into the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. Hey, let me tell you what, you're going to hear stuff here that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Hear that, George Snorri?
We are talking to George Knapp, investigative journalist, UFO investigator, and we're looking now at the frontiers of science and how far can we go in figuring out what maybe makes those UFOs tick. So, George, you want to provide that answer?
I think the example you use of O'Hare is a good example of the kind of thing that Bigelow would want to dig into with this new undertaking, Bass. You very elegantly described what this craft did, and I think that example would explain why it'd be worth Bigelow's time to go out and talk to eyewitnesses and research individual cases, because the answers to this probably does require out-of-the-box thinking. The way you describe it as not being entirely material object, that might not occur to anybody until you have a case like this where it is so clearly demonstrated. So then he has his scientists start thinking about how would we accomplish this? And maybe it is too far beyond us, but you can't start until you get the idea, and maybe that's what these cases do, is provide an inspiration or get them on the right track of thinking about how to accomplish something like this. Whether or not we can get it, I don't know, but man, that's a great case, and you know what? I'd be happy to pass that along to Colin and the other folks who are working with him if you'd like.
The thing that struck me about that O'Hare case, as I said, it ties back to a personal episode I had back in the 70s in Somerset, New Jersey, and I've talked about it on the show. There's no need to repeat it now. I'll be happy to talk to you about it off the air. But I basically, at very close proximity, I witnessed a craft moving, and again, it's that, I've described it on the show before, it's this idea that you have something that's at a full standstill. It's absolutely stationary in the air at low altitude, and then basically shoots straight up where there is no sense of acceleration. It goes from absolutely motionless to full speed in one shot. There is no sense of something gaining acceleration. When you see that, there's no way to actually describe that. It's a visual that has stayed with me ever since. And when you see that, it's one of these things where this is when you know that you're actually having, I think, a true paranormal episode happening in front of you, because there is no way to actually relate it to anything that you know. And this is that, I think that when these kinds of things happen, the fact that there's a disconnect between the way that, the eyes see it and the brain processes it, sometimes this is actually, I think, misinterpreted, or I shouldn't say misinterpreted. It's seen through this filter of high strangeness, and those are the two words that come up a lot when we talk about the very fringes of this stuff. And I think that when people talk about high strangeness, in some ways, that's a way to verbalize this disconnect between the eye and the brain when this is happening. That people perceive this as having some element of high strangeness, which puts it outside of even what we consider to be a paranormal experience, and makes it something that is almost now surreal in nature, and makes people think, now wait a minute, maybe I can't even trust my own senses with regards to this, and even muddies the whole discussion even more. I mean, this is just, you get to the point where you start to have these breakdowns of what good words will do you in describing this stuff, or being able to convey to somebody something went from being fully motionless to full speed, no acceleration. There's no reference for that. There's no place in nature where we see that occur, really, in any way that your brain can make use of it.
I think the famous quote from Arthur C. Clarke, if we did find an alien civilization with sufficiently advanced technology, it would appear to us as equivalent to magic, and I think that's what you're describing. Jacques Vallée, back to him, who I can't say enough good stuff about the guy. Something else, a theme he developed years ago that really struck a chord with me is the idea that these UFO appearances are affecting us on some other level, a subconscious level, that they appear to people not necessarily the importance isn't the sighting itself, but a long-term kind of I don't know if it's a plan, but certainly a long-term effect on our collective consciousness over and over again that tends to be reinforced in ways that we don't immediately understand. Obviously that incident you had a powerful, a profound effect on you, even this many years later. And there are millions of people all over the world who've had that same kind of a similar kind of experience, who've had similar profound effects in their lives, and I think Jacques might have been onto something that I don't know if there's a grand specific plan, an acculturation process, a conditioning process. If it wasn't intended to be that, it certainly seems to be having that effect.
Well, at that point, you have to start to wonder. I think he referred to it as a control system.
Yes.
Yeah, and you have to start to wonder, though, at what point do we use our own cultural conditioning to try to put some sort of a context around this that we can make any kind of use out of? Because we, as human beings, like to think of ourselves as the center of the universe. And one of the things I also got from that little bit of that MUFON meeting that I saw you speaking on YouTube was this idea that you said that Maybe our egos couldn't handle finding out the truth of this because maybe it would really destroy that sense that we have of being sort of this central focal point that certainly things like religion have always, supported, this idea of being special. What if we found out that, well, maybe we're not that special at all. Maybe, in fact, we're just part of this genetic bank that is the planet Earth that maybe is what is actually of interest to these beings.
Or like Fort said, that we're property or something, or that other people have said they use us to harvest souls, or maybe they're here like us, we're the drive-in movie theater of the cosmos or something, and look at the goofy earthlings and what they're going to do next. Or, you talk, bringing it back to disclosure and exopolitics and the idea that suddenly they're going to spill all the secrets. I don't believe it's going to happen for a variety of reasons. One of being that maybe there really is something that we're not ready to handle. Right? You and the three of us think we're ready to handle it. We're interested in these topics. We want to know, and you hear that everywhere you go at the conferences and in these circles. We want to know. We're ready for it. Well, maybe not. Maybe the ultimate truth would be so disturbing that we couldn't handle it. I mean, this dimensional stuff that we got into, the possibility that it's some kind of a dimensional doorway at Skinwalker Ranch, people are not ready for that. It was a major shift, just the idea that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and that the Milky Way isn't even the center of the universe, and we're just out on the sticks, cosmically speaking, and people have had trouble with that over the years, and that we're not the apple of God's eye. Now, what if you got to get your mind around the idea of parallel dimensions, where there are beings living among us, around us? They can see us, but we can't see them. They can interact with our world, and we can't interact with theirs. Do they see us in the shower? Do they see us in the bedroom? Do they pay any attention to us at all? People are going to have trouble with that. And if there is an actual cover-up, maybe it's something like that, covering something up that really we're not quite ready to handle.
Well, if they see us in the shower, it might be just like washing a dog.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of reason to believe that is certainly a possibility. Of course, when we talk about this stuff, it's always important to distinguish between possibilities and probabilities. And this is where, of course, sadly, there's this idea that every opinion is valid when discussing this stuff. You see this in the New Age realm, where people throw around the term energy very often without having a good idea of what it really means. Now, this we have to bring up, you brought up Coast to Coast. So let's talk about this for a minute, because obviously you've had a long time involvement with the show. I think a lot of people perceive that a lot of what happens on there ends up being entertainment. Is this, George, a situation where we're forever going to be stuck in a rut where any kind of discussion around this ultimately, in order to appeal to the masses, has to be framed in entertainment for it to be attractive to the masses? Is any kind of really deep discussion of these topics always going to be limited to a very small subset of people? What do you think about that?
Probably. And, I've seen some of the stuff that you guys have, the issues you've raised about Coast and the broad spectrum of guests that are on the program, some credible, some not. And I think you raise legitimate questions. It's something that I know the producers have grappled with. They would like every night to be a Richard Dolan type character on the show to credibly go through a pile of information. But the fact is, it is an entertainment medium. They do have a very big tent approach to a whole variety of topics. It's sort of taken the cue from Art Bell way back when. I think you can be both entertaining and illuminating at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. I know my own shows that I have a great deal of to say about the guests that I get to talk to. I don't go into necessarily belittling or grilling some of these guys that come on, even though I don't see eye to eye with everybody who has been on the guest on the program with me anyway. It's more like an approach of somebody you have in your living room, and since they're a guest, you let them make their case, have their say, and you ask some questions. And, sometimes it can get a little tense, but for the most part, I tend to let them just tell their story, and I'll probe it here and there and look for weaknesses, but I don't grill them. At least that's the approach I take. And I know that for a lot of people, and again, it goes back to our media topic and looking at this, a lot of people would look at Coast to Coast and look at all the big spectrum of guests and think, well, and tar the whole thing with the same brush. Is that, good gosh, it's got to be goofy. It can't have any credibility if one day they've got a Richard Dolan type guy on, and the next day they're channeling ancient space aliens or something. It's a tough nut, but I'll tell you that show, good gosh, does it grind up the material? I mean, to put somebody in there who is interesting every night of the week for 4 hours, it's tough. I think those producers work pretty hard to try to keep it interesting, and not every guest works. I know I only do 2 shows a month, and not every guest works, and sometimes you think you're going to hit one out of the park, and it just falls completely flat. Some people are just fall apart on the air, or just not very credible. It's a tough nut. I mean, it's a tough project. It's a lot harder than it might sound to put that thing together.
It sounds difficult. I mean, we in doing the Paracast, I know that we certainly had our shows that have worked and the ones that have not worked at all. It can be a real problem, and we're just doing it once a week. The idea of doing it, every night and having 4 hours to fill, it's daunting. It's real daunting. And especially, and it's a fine balance. Look, on the Paracast, we've created this situation where we every now and then will bring someone on and do the most basic armchair stuff. We had a guy late last year who had been on Coast to Coast last summer and made a lot of claims and hadn't been pressed about any of his claims. We had him on the show, and essentially, it turns out this guy was an actual criminal. A criminal. Was stealing money from people and doing some very bad things. Real bad stuff. And we had Frank Warren come on with us, and it was the most basic due diligence that we did. What I would definitely categorize as armchair research to completely discredit everything this guy had to say. And we did this on the show, and it's interesting how that plays out, because you have some segment of the audience that really appreciates that. They're hungry for that. And then you have other people who get very annoyed by that. They don't want you to be critical in any way, because essentially the idea is, well, everybody should have a voice and everybody's opinion should be listened to. And sadly, you get to the point where you have to tell people, look, some opinions perhaps are more valid or more valuable or more justified than others. But of course, in our society, there is a sense that, well, everybody's got to have their say.
Well, everybody can have their say, but they don't have to have their say on my radio show anyway, or on yours. I think you guys have a really cool niche there in doing that kind of stuff. It's very much needed in the field, and you carry it off, man. You do. It's good work, and it's something that needs to be done, weeding things out and exposing people for who they are. It's not always possible to do that on Coast to Coast. It's a different kind of a mission and a different kind of an audience, but we try to do a good job.
Well, we're also glad to have you there.
Thanks. Well, I enjoy it. I get a kick out of it. If I can go to work and do a job and I don't have to wear pants, that's fun, I'm just kidding.
I thought you were going to say you didn't have to wear a tie, but oh man, you're not wearing pants. Oh boy.
Do you do this from their studio or what?
I did it from a studio here for a while at a station in Las Vegas, but they kept forgetting that I was coming. I'd show up on Sunday night and there's nobody there, and then the shows would get canceled. So they installed a portable system at a private location, I'll put it that way. And we've had some technical problems with that as well. It's now in the process of being moved to another location, and it's nice that I don't have to travel across town to go to a studio. It's much closer to home. I would tell you where it is, but I don't want people showing up and banging on the door while the show's going on.
Well, if you invite us privately, we'll go there, but we will not use our cameras, our digital cameras, and my iPhone. I'll turn the camera off, make sure it's not done.
Okay. Hey, I get a kick out of doing the show. It's different. It's a different medium. It's much different. It's riding a bull, though, at times. I'm interested in UFOs. I only get to do 2 shows a month, so at least one of them is going to be about the UFO topic in some aspect. And all the grief I get, you can never please everybody, that's for sure. And people will say, oh, geez, UFOs, I don't want to hear about UFOs. And to which I respond, well, man, you're listening to the wrong show, because, that's sort of a core topic here. It's tough to please everybody, but, you got to try.
Well, the other thing is, too, if UFOs are real, if what we've been talking about for most of our lives, David and myself, in different ways, and what you've been exploring for so many years, if it's real, it's possibly the biggest story of the decade, of the century, since well, as far back as we could remember. Because right now, everything else is going on is so heavy to deal with, economics and all that we really don't have time to worry about whether UFOs are real, although in the end it may represent a more important story. Are you ready to order the official Paracast t-shirt? You asked, we answered. We're now taking orders for the official Paracast t-shirt. It comes in white, 100% cotton. The front of it features the same logo that we have on our community forums. On the back it says, separating signal from noise. It's just $14.95 plus shipping in your choice of sizes. To order the official Paracast t-shirt, here's all you have to do. Visit our new online store at store.theparacast.com. One more time, that's store.theparacast.com. You can use a major credit card or PayPal to place your order for the official Paracast t-shirt.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We are talking to George Knapp, investigative journalist, and we've been focusing on lots of fascinating UFO-related information. We focused originally on Area 51 and Bob Lazar and all the unusual characters.
Before you move on, Gene, before you move on, there's actually something you just said I want to ask George a question about. It's interesting that you talk, you mentioned, Gene, all of these problems that we're facing now, certainly the financial meltdown and so forth, but George, do you get the sense that, like I've heard other people say, and I wonder what you think about this, that when things get tough, when the economy gets real problematic, things get rocky, people have a lot of stress, do you think they turn to these topics like UFOs, ghosts, the paranormal, as a sense of escape? Do you think that the audience for these topics increases in times like this?
I guess it's possible, but I haven't seen any real definitive pattern in that regard. I mean, the interest in this, it waxes and wanes at different times, and I don't think it's related necessarily to the economy. I know a lot of people would like to dismiss it and explain it in that way as a dismissive a notion, oh gosh, it's just people reacting to the times. It's the same kind of a view that this is people trying to find God in their own lives, except for they're using the guise of aliens instead. And I don't. I think there's a lot of different reasons people are interested in it, but this interest in this topic has gone on forever, and the economy changes, wars change, come and go, and things like that, but UFOs remain. And I agree with you that the importance of the subject. I think it is the biggest story of all time, which is part of the appeal and the reason that I've stayed active in it for so long. The fact that there aren't other mainstream journalists, networks who pay some attention to it, it's their loss, because it is a big story. It is such a rich area, rich in lore and mythology, and rich in facts as well. And it's a fascinating undertaking to separate the two. It needs a Woodward Bernstein. It needs 60 Minutes, something like that, to dig into it and use their influence and power. But that's not going to happen. It's not. And it's too bad. It's amazing to me that more journalists, more serious journalists, radio, TV, whatever, people like yourselves don't jump into it with both feet and look for what really is going on, because it is big. Now, maybe the economy is a more pressing problem. We need to worry about bread on the table. We don't have to solve the UFO mystery today, but by golly, if and when it ever is fully explained and explored, I think it would be the biggest story of all time, and it's going to change everything.
Well, if there is disclosure, I felt, and I think David might agree with me, that we have no control over the circumstances of that disclosure. It's going to be done on their terms, not ours. And if that's the case, it could happen at any time, at any place. Some event can occur that is clearly unexplainable, clearly identified as something not of this earth, not of this dimension, whatever. It could happen at any time.
It could, the proverbial saucer on the White House lawn kind of a thing. But, the lesson I have learned, one of the lessons from Skinwalker Ranch is, and it sort of goes back to things that Valet has written over the years, and what Whitley Strieber once said, is that the secrecy, the cover-up, begins with them. The visitors, the aliens, whatever the heck they are, they call the shots. That was the experience at Skinwalker Ranch. Bob Bigelow calls it performances. An earlier writer called it Utah's UFO display, because that's what it is, a display. They decide who gets to see it. They decide how much they get to see, under what circumstances. They give us the glimpses, and we are left to ask why some of us are allowed to see it and why others are not. Valet had a term for it. He called it a deliberate pattern of unbelievability, I think, where we see these things that don't seem to make sense. They happen over and over again, and they don't add up. And that actually, in psychology, is sort of a good learning tool, but it has to take place over a long period of time. I sure am going to be frustrated if I end up dying an old man or not so old man and don't have the answers, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. Man, it'd drive me crazy. I see some of these UFO researchers who've been into it for 50 years. They die. They're no closer to answering any of the big questions than when they started. That is very frustrating, and I suspect that is going to be the case when we pass over into some other realm, but hope otherwise.
Well, you see, of course, there are some of those researchers really on in years right now. We look at John Keel, who hasn't been in the greatest of health in recent years, and he is somebody in his 70s. And we've talked, of course, to Bud Hopkins, who is not quite a youth anymore. And, I've been in touch with a few people who've been around UFO research for a long time who are suffering from different ailments. And maybe we kind of hope that maybe the UFO naughts will come down here, whoever and whatever they are, and help cure us of our ills. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we have all this wishful thinking going on in the UFO field, because it's felt if there is an advanced power, and we're not talking necessarily about God here, but just a race that's maybe thousands or millions of years ahead of us, they have all the answers. They have the answers to energy, free energy. They have the answers to prolonging your life. And we're just kind of muddling along here trying to figure out what's going on. But something that you had said earlier in the show, and I guess we never really covered past it, back to Area 51. And we don't have a lot of time left, but I just think about it all the time here when that particular part of the world, and obviously you're much closer to it than I am, when I think about it, I say, you know what? Is there really any evidence at all of any activity involving alien craft at Area 51? Is there all secret weapons or secret aircraft?
It could be. There's no definitive evidence. I don't have a piece of a saucer. I've got eyewitness statements. I've got a couple of fuzzy photos, some videos. The credibility of the witnesses goes from very high to very low. And no, there's no definitive evidence at all. The best you could say is that if they had it, that would be where they would test it and store it. If they ever had it out there, I'm sure it's not there anymore. There's too many eyes on it, too much public interest focused on the base. And as I said, if they were using it as a ruse, that was a terrible mistake. But yeah, I think it's possible that all those programs, everything that we've seen out there is everything that everybody's reported might be a legitimate Earth origin technology, secret stuff. Ben Rich, the late great Ben Rich of Lockheed Skunk Works, he sort of hinted a couple of times before he died that we've already got the ability to go to the stars, that anything you can imagine now, we've got it. Doesn't mean we're necessarily developing it and using it, but we've got it. Ben Rich also privately conceded to friends of his in letters that I've seen that he believes in UFOs of both kinds, unfunded opportunities and more exotic things from somewhere else. I got a chance to interview him one time when they rolled out the F-117, and I asked him the persistent rumors that F-117, the stealth technology, might have been based on something that we got from aliens, from crashed saucers or whatever. And he kind of smiled and paused, and nope, just good old earthbound know-how, but I know that he shared his statements that he believed that we had made advances based on stuff that we got from somewhere else. Whether that constitutes proof, probably not. It's not the same as having a cigarette lighter from an alien spacecraft, and I'm not sure we're ever going to get that. I can't prove that we had that stuff out there, and I probably never will be. I just know it's a legitimate story that's worth pursuing, if for no other reason than to shake the cage and see what falls out.
The other thing is here, if they had the secret weapon from the aliens or the secret aircraft, how would they move it out in a way that we wouldn't see it, especially because all the eyes are on Area 51? What would they do? Do everything underground?
Sure. I mean, that test site area out there is gigantic. I mean, maybe you put it underground somewhere and just leave it there for a while and come back when things die down in a couple of years, or assuming they ever do. They're pretty crafty out there. I had an interview one time with our late Senator Howard Cannon, he had 4 terms in Washington. He essentially helped build Area 51 and Nellis. He was very close friends with the guys at Lockheed, and when he lost his last re-election bid, they allowed him to pilot an SR-71. They gave him a flight in it. He was a brigadier general. He was very close to Barry Goldwater, talked about Wright-Patterson and all that stuff with Goldwater, and had a closet interest in UFOs. And I did the last TV interview with him before he died, and he sort of got right up to the edge of saying that we had that stuff out there. But what he did say in definitive terms is that, I asked him about the idea of secrets, because when people talk about UFOs, oh, no, nobody could keep a secret like that. He says, well, let me tell you, we've kept some pretty big secrets out there, and we still have some secrets that are being kept. We can and do keep secrets. And so the idea that everything, the government always leaks like a sieve and secrets can't be kept, secrets even of a magnitude like this can't be kept, is false. And I agree with the late senator. I think secrets can be kept. They are being kept. And just like the aliens or the visitors who decide what we get to see and how much, I think that's what happens with the government on topics as sensitive as this one.
Quick question, George, about Bigelow. I think there's a sense that a lot of the information that was gathered at Skinwalker was sort of tucked away. It wasn't really shared. With this new initiative to put some money behind MUFON to look into these potential alternate propulsion systems, do you get the sense that this is going to be the kind of thing where he's going to be more open about sharing information that might be gleaned that maybe is not directly related to propulsion systems? Or do you think that this is going to be, like a lot of what he does, fairly secretive?
I don't know. I mean, he is by nature a secretive guy, plays his cards pretty close to the chest. He has said that the information, whatever they get, would be made public. I think that's part of what the deal with MUFON is that they will have access to whatever information comes in and would be allowed to share it. I'm not sure that applies to proprietary information about secret, exotic space propulsion technologies. I can't imagine Bob spending all this money and then letting that go and just sharing it with the public. I hope that he sticks to his vow to make this information public. I'm going to meet with him, I hope, to talk exactly about that and see exactly what he has in mind. And maybe you guys want to have me back on after I do that. I know he doesn't want to do any interviews right now, but I think the MUFON people are able to talk about it. As for the Skinwalker Ranch, I was privy to that information while the study was going on. And I know there is the sense that there's lots of good stuff that didn't come out. If it's good stuff that didn't come out, it's nothing that I heard of. I'm nothing like any kind of technology or anything like that. I mean, I got those reports all during that time period, the same ones that were circulated to his other staff and board members, and it was driving me crazy because I couldn't talk about it, but I didn't see any of that. And pretty much most of the incidents and the most interesting episodes were detailed in our book. I don't think, as far as I know, there's nothing really big that was held back. You are right in one sense in that specifics from those incidents, I don't know where it is. I mean, there's files that he has, and it's not any kind of vault or anything where he's keeping it off limits. It's a matter of just having stashed it.